My brother tried to cheat me out of my inheritance, but now we're locked in the basement because the house Dad left us isn't an asset. It's a cage for something ancient, and my brother just broke the lock. The air in the solicitor's office hung thick and dusty, smelling faintly of old paper and even older resentment. Outside, the mid-morning sun of early November did little to warm the gloom clinging to the mahogany furniture. Across the polished surface sat my brother, Mark. He looked like a stretched-out version of himself, taller, sharper in the jaw, and considerably more expensive in his tailored suit, which still couldn't hide the desperation simmering just beneath the surface. "Look, Leo," Mark started, his voice unnaturally smooth, the kind of voice he used when trying to close a bad real estate deal. "Let's just be adults about this. Dad's will is straightforward, but honestly, splitting everything 50-50 on the house and the liquid assets, it's just inefficient." I leaned back in the leather chair, trying to appear as relaxed as I felt utterly wired. Inefficient. That was Mark's word for fairness. For the last 2 years since Dad passed, he'd been circling, maneuvering. He needed the full inheritance, the old family home, the modest savings, to bail out his failing tech startup. I, on the other hand, just needed my half to live comfortably, maybe finally open that small woodworking shop I'd been sketching designs for in my notebooks. "Inefficient how, Mark?" I asked, keeping my tone level. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, preparing for the usual bullying tactics. Dad had always known Mark was the ambitious one, the one who saw everything in terms of profit and loss. That's why he'd specifically mandated the equal split, ensuring Mark couldn't just bulldoze me. "Well, the upkeep on the house alone is going to drain both our portions equally if we try to sell it piecemeal or manage the estate taxes together. It's smarter if one of us takes ownership outright, liquidates the required amount, and the other gets a lump sum buyout that reflects the current market valuation, plus a premium for the quick settlement." He paused, letting the implication hang there. "I'm prepared to offer you a significant premium, Leo, more than you'd get if we fought the sale process for the next year." The premium he was offering was just enough to sound tempting, but it conveniently undervalued the property by about 20% compared to what I knew it was worth if we waited for the spring market. It was a classic Mark maneuver: dangle a shiny immediate carrot while sticking you with the long-term loss. "And what's your offer for my half exactly?" I crossed my arms. Mark slid a crisp, folded document across the desk. It was a contract, pre-drafted, ready for signatures. 50% of the appraised value minus 5% administrative fees, paid out in 30 days. You walk away clean, no hassle, and I take on the full responsibility of the estate transfer. I picked up the paper. The numbers swam before my eyes. A little lower than I'd hoped. A lot lower than I felt I deserved after Dad had always favored my quiet stability over Mark's chaotic brilliance. "No, Mark," I said, pushing the contract back. The small act felt monumental. "I don't want a buyout. I want my half, as Dad intended. We sell the house, we split the proceeds. If you want the house, you buy me out at fair market value, not some discounted rate designed to save your skin." Mark's face tightened, the facade of the sophisticated businessman cracking around the edges. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Leo. This startup is everything. If I lose this round, it's over. Everything Dad left us goes down the drain anyway, and you get nothing but the headache of property taxes." "That's my risk to take," I countered. "You want control? Fine. But you pay for it fairly." He slammed his palm flat on the desk, making the antique inkwell jump. "You stubborn, sentimental idiot. You think living off some dusty carpentry workshop is going to solve anything? I need that capital now." Then find a loan, Mark. Don't try to swindle your own brother. The tension in the room ratcheted up until I thought the glass in the window might shatter. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, the polished veneer entirely gone. You leave me no choice, Leo. If you don't sign this agreement by the end of the week, I will contest the will on the grounds of undue influence. I blinked. Undue influence? Dad was lucid up until the end. What grounds could you possibly have? The grounds that you were the primary caregiver in the last year. The grounds that you spent more time with him than I did, subtly steering his final decisions. It'll be messy, Leo. Long, drawn-out court battles. And I have resources you don't. He offered a predatory smile that chilled me to the bone. Think about that carpentry shop turning into a money pit while you argue legal technicalities for 2 years. Sign the paper, Leo, or I bury you in probate. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, clearly thinking he had won. He had played his trump card. The threat of a protracted, ugly legal fight that would drain my emotional and financial reserves just as surely as it would drain his. I looked down at the untouched contract, then up at my brother, already halfway to the door. Wait, I said, my voice barely a breath. Mark stopped, his hand on the brass doorknob. He turned back slowly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face that I hadn't immediately capitulated. You think I haven't considered this? I asked quietly. You think I didn't know you'd try to bully me the second Dad was gone? He scoffed, regaining his arrogance. Then what, Leo? You're going to fight me. You think you can win against my lawyers? I stood up too, walking around the desk until I was standing directly in front of him. I didn't look at his expensive shoes or his tailored suit. I looked him straight in the eye. I don't have to win against your lawyers, Mark, because if you file that contest, if you bring up undue influence or challenge Dad's capacity, you are going to find out exactly why Dad structured the will the way he did, and why he kept certain documents completely separate from the main estate. Mark's confident posture wavered. A tiny muscle jumped in his jaw. What are you talking about? There's nothing separate. I went through the safety deposit box myself when Dad was in the hospital the first time. It was just bonds and insurance policies. I gave him a cold, slow shake of my head. You looked for the money, Mark. You never looked for the truth. I took a deep breath, the dust in the room suddenly feeling like grave dirt. You want to drag this to court? Fine. Because if we do, I'm going to present the evidence Dad left me, evidence that proves he didn't just leave us the house and the savings. He left a reason why you couldn't have full control. Mark's face had gone the color of skim milk. The desperation that had been simmering was now boiling over into pure panic. He gripped the doorknob so tightly his knuckles were white. What evidence, Leo? Stop playing games. What did he leave you? He choked out. I leaned in close, ensuring only he could hear the next words, the words that had been burning a hole in my pocket since the day Dad died, the words I never wanted to use. He left me the ledger, Mark, and the signed confession, the one detailing exactly what you did with that seed money from Grandma's trust 15 years ago, the money that funded your first disastrous venture and left her penniless before she passed. Dad hid it. He hid it because he loved you, but he also made sure that if you ever tried to steal from me, I had the ultimate weapon. I paused, letting the weight of the secret settle between us, heavy and toxic. You demand my half of the inheritance, Mark? That's fine. But you just learned about Dad's secret, and now you know that if you contest the will, the price for that fight won't just be the house. It'll be your freedom. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. Mark didn't move. He stood frozen by the door, his expensive Italian leather shoes rooted to the antique rug, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. His eyes, usually so calculating and sharp, were wide with naked terror. The confession. I hadn't even been sure he'd remember the details of that old scandal. Grandma's trust, a relatively small sum, but the foundation of Mark's entire initial trajectory, had vanished overnight when he was barely 21, allegedly invested poorly in a volatile market. Dad had always smoothed it over, paid back the principal to keep the family peace, but he had never forgotten the betrayal. The ledger? Mark finally managed, his voice a dry rasp that barely carried across the desk. He looked down at his perfectly manicured hands, then back up at me, searching my face for a sign of bluffing. "It's not just a ledger, Mark," I corrected him gently, though I felt anything but gentle inside. Every word felt like throwing a stone through stained glass. It's Dad's precise accounting of every penny that disappeared, and the confession he coerced you into signing before he'd cover the debt. He kept it in the false bottom of his roll-top desk, the one you apparently missed when you ransacked his study looking for deeds and stock certificates. Mark staggered back a step, bumping lightly against the doorframe. He looked profoundly ill. All his practiced confidence, the smug certainty that he could manipulate me, had evaporated in the face of a decade-old crime coming back to haunt him. "Leo, you wouldn't," he whispered, the threat replaced entirely by pleading. "You can't bring that up. That was 15 years ago. It was a mistake. I paid it back." "You paid it back with Dad's money, Mark. You never paid back Grandma, not really. And now you're trying to take the last thing he left me to secure your next venture. You threatened to use the legal system to strip me bare over a fair inheritance, so I'm showing you what the real legal system would look like if you push this inheritance battle." His mind was visibly racing, calculating the damage. A civil dispute over inheritance versus a potential criminal charge for financial fraud from his early 20s, brought forward now by the executor of his father's estate, me. The statute of limitations might be blurry, but the public relations disaster, the shame and the potential imprisonment, that was very real. It would certainly put a final, catastrophic end to his current startup, and probably any future career prospects. "I won't contest the will," Mark said quickly, too quickly. He smoothed his tie again, a desperate attempt to regain control over his external presentation. "I apologize, Leo. I spoke out of turn. The pressure, it's immense. I was wrong to threaten you. Let's just stick to the initial agreement. We sell the house in the spring, 50-50 split, no premium, no buyout." It was a truce, but the terms were still dictated by my leverage. I narrowed my eyes. "That's not enough, Mark. You don't get to threaten me, push me to the brink, and then ask to go back to the baseline as if nothing happened. You tried to extort me. That costs more than just walking away. What do you want, then?" His voice was tight, laced with resentment, but undeniably compliant. I walked back to my side of the desk, picking up a pen, but not the contract he'd brought. I pulled a blank sheet of company letterhead from the solicitor's tray, something official looking. "You take the house. You get the full asset transfer immediately. You can refinance whatever you need. You can run your business from it. You can have it all," I dictated, writing deliberately. "In return, you sign over your entire share of the liquid assets, the bonds, the savings accounts Dad set up, to me. That's roughly equal market value to the house, so we settle the division immediately, and you get the immediate capital infusion you're desperate for." Mark stared at the paper. Giving up the house. The tangible asset, the home where we grew up, in exchange for the liquid cash he craved. It was a trade he'd have made yesterday if he hadn't been so arrogant that he thought he could get everything. The house and all the liquid assets? He repeated, trying to find the loophole. What about the debts, the outstanding estate fees? You take everything, Mark. The assets, the liabilities, the maintenance, the taxes. Everything tied to the physical property. I take the cash equivalent of my half of the total estate value right now, clear of any debt or future obligation. Clean break. You get the roof over your head and the immediate cash injection. I get security and the ability to walk away from this nightmare. It was a brilliant trade for me. I was shedding the responsibility of the massive, aging house, which I knew would be a continuous drain, and securing my financial future instantly. Mark got what he needed most: the physical property, the symbol of his perceived birthright, and the immediate liquidity he required to save his company. He hesitated for only a moment, weighing the immediate need for cash against the long-term value of the property. His startup, he knew, was on the brink of collapse, requiring a massive immediate influx to secure a crucial bridge loan. He was scheduled to close on next Tuesday. "Fine," he snapped, snatching the pen. He signed my hastily drafted agreement with vicious speed, not even bothering to read the fine print beyond confirming the transfer of assets versus property title. He practically ripped the paper from my hand, shoved it into his briefcase, and turned back to the door, desperate to escape the toxic air. "One last thing, Mark," I called out as he reached for the knob again. He froze, shoulders tight. This time I wasn't bluffing. I didn't have another weapon ready. I just wanted to see the last flicker of the brother I remembered before greed consumed him. "You need to understand something. I'm letting you walk away clean from the confession because Dad made me promise. He made me swear on his deathbed that I would protect you from yourself as long as you didn't hurt me." Mark turned, his expression softening marginally, a ghost of the old fraternal bond flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Leo. Really. I won't forget this." "I know you won't forget," I said, my voice flat. "You'll forget the promise, but you won't forget the leverage. That ledger stays buried. But if you ever so much as look at my woodworking shop with dollar signs in your eyes, or try to involve me in any of your next big things, I will bring that ledger to the authorities myself." He nodded once, sharp and final. He opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the solicitor's office, clutching the signed document that formalized my release from both my inheritance and my brother. I felt an odd mix of relief and profound sadness. The inheritance was settled. I had my future secured. I gathered my things, intending to leave immediately and start making calls about a small workshop space downtown. As I was sliding my chair back, preparing to exit the grim room, the solicitor, Mr. Davies, who had sat silently by the window observing the entire exchange, cleared his throat. "Mr. Leo," he said, his voice betraying a strange urgency, "before you go, I should inform you that Mr. Mark's acquisition of the property title, though swift, triggers the final contingency clause we discussed privately, the one outside the main will." My heart sank. Contingency clause? Dad had never mentioned any contingency clause regarding the house. "What contingency, Mr. Davies?" I asked, turning back toward the desk, dread pooling in my stomach. Mr. Davies nervously pushed his spectacles up his nose, his face pale. "It relates to the condition of the property itself, specifically the wing Dad sealed off after your mother died. It stipulates that if the property ownership transfers to the surviving son, who did not have full power of attorney over Dad in the last year. That would be Mr. Mark. Then the entire structure, including the contents of the sealed wing, must be made accessible immediately, and the executor must verify that all of Dad's research materials are intact. Research materials? I echoed, confused. Dad had been a retired accountant. What research materials? Mr. Davies swallowed hard, looking toward the heavy, locked oak door at the far end of the solicitor's private library, a door I'd never even noticed before, located just behind his chair. Mr. Leo, your father was not just an accountant. He was an amateur historian specializing in obscure local folklore. And the sealed wing. It wasn't sealed because of your mother's passing. It was sealed because of what he found inside it 2 years ago. Something he was terrified Mark would stumble upon and exploit. And now, Mr. Mark has just signed the papers that legally compel me to unlock it. He stood up, reaching for a heavy, antiquated key ring hanging on the wall. And I'm afraid, Mr. Leo, that Mr. Mark has already left the building to go secure his financing. He has no idea what's behind that door. But I do, and judging by the state of panic he was in when he left, I suspect whatever is in there is infinitely worse than any debt he owes us. The key ring Mr. Davies held was brass, heavy, and seemed to hold the weight of decades. Each key was intricately cut, archaic symbols glinting dully in the dim light of the library. My initial relief at escaping Mark's financial squeeze evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping suspicion that Dad hadn't just been protecting me from Mark. He'd been protecting the world from whatever this sealed wing contained. "Wait a minute," I said, moving back toward the desk, my eyes fixed on the formidable oak door. Dad never mentioned any sealed wing. He never mentioned obscure folklore research. He was meticulous. Everything was accounted for. "That was the beauty of it, Leo," Mr. Davies murmured, his voice strained as he searched the rack for the right key. He managed his life meticulously for the public eye, but for the last few years he was consumed by something else entirely. Something he only trusted me, as his executor and longtime solicitor, to manage according to his final wishes. He was terrified of Mark finding it. Yes, Mark would have tried to patent it, monetize it, or probably sell it to the highest bidder, regardless of the consequences. Mr. Davies located a key, long and oddly shaped, almost like a skeletal finger. As he inserted it into the lock of the heavy door, the mechanism groaned in protest, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "What exactly is in there, Mr. Davies?" I pressed. "Tell me now, because if it's that bad, I need to call Mark back before he realizes the house transfer is complete." Mr. Davies paused, the key halfway turned. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He called it the archive. He spent the last 2 years of his life documenting local occurrences that defied rational explanation. He was particularly focused on patterns of migration, not bird migration, Leo, but something older. Something connected to the geographic ley lines beneath this town, which, coincidentally, all converge directly under the footprint of our family home. My mind flashed back to the nights I'd spent caring for Dad in his final months. He'd seemed so frail, so focused on mundane tasks, yet all the while he was apparently cataloging occult geography under his roof. Ley lines, occult activity. Dad was an accountant, Davies. He was an accountant, which made him the perfect person to spot the anomalies in the historical tax records and property surveys, Davies countered, his voice suddenly firming up with professional conviction, despite the bizarre subject matter. He believed that by drawing specific patterns on the land over generations, certain energies could be channeled, and he believed our property was the apex. The key clicked. The heavy bolts retracted with a startling final sound. Mr. Davies gripped the handle but didn't open the door. The final instruction, Leo, was this. If the ownership ever transferred to Mark, I was to immediately contact you and explain that the house must be demolished within 72 hours of the transfer. If it is not demolished, the localized energy, which your father believed he had successfully stabilized using specific countermeasures within the foundation, will destabilize. He said the house isn't just built on the nexus, it is the containment field. My blood ran cold. I looked from the impassive, sweating solicitor to the dark, menacing crack opening in the oak door. This wasn't about money or petty sibling rivalry anymore. This was about the house itself, the physical structure we both grew up in, being some kind of arcane lock. Demolish it, I echoed, disbelief warring with sudden, terrifying belief. Mark was rushing to secure a loan based on the property's title, planning to move his family in next week. He was going to be living inside a time bomb. Yes, but Mark is already gone. He has the title, contingent on the estate being fully settled. He left before I could intercept him. Mr. Davies wrung his hands. I have to call him. I have to tell him to stop finalizing the loan and get out of the property registry office. No, I interrupted, adrenaline flooding my system. I knew Mark. If Davies called him now, Mark would assume this was a trick, a final attempt to extort a different deal now that he thought he had the upper hand with the house secured. He would never believe an accountant dad was involved in mystical containment fields. He would push the deal through just to spite us both. We can't call him Mr. Davies. We have to get to the house. He's probably already there, or on his way to meet the lenders. We have to get him out, or at least stop him from signing those final papers before he takes full possession. I grabbed my jacket. The relief of solving the inheritance dispute was completely overshadowed by the realization that I had just successfully handed my vengeful, desperate brother the keys to something catastrophic, all while thinking I was just protecting myself. The address, Mr. Davies. Give me the address of the holding company he used for the immediate liquidation, the one he was planning to use for the loan collateral transfer. If we can stop the paperwork, the house title reverts, and the contingency doesn't activate. Mr. Davies scrambled through his desk, pulling out a transfer document from Mark's briefcase, which he had apparently pocketed in the rush. It's the Meridian Trust offices downtown. They specialize in quick asset-backed transfers. He's meeting them in an hour. I bolted for the door, throwing one last look back at the solicitor. If I can't stop him in time, Davies, and he takes control of that house, what happens in 72 hours? Mr. Davies' face was etched with genuine horror. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the locked, ominous door. Finally, he whispered, the words heavy with finality. He said the house was the containment field, Leo. If the field breaks, whatever energy your father was holding back isn't just going to make the property vanish. It's going to radiate outward. It's going to draw things to the nexus point. And the nexus point, Leo, is currently registered under your brother's name. I ran out of the office and into the bright, unsuspecting sunlight. The knowledge that my brother was marching straight toward an arcane energy bomb, a bomb that would destroy him and everyone around him, burning in my mind. I jumped into my old truck, slammed the key into the ignition, and roared toward downtown, knowing that stopping Mark wasn't about saving my inheritance anymore. It was about saving his life. and potentially the entire block from whatever ancient horror Dad had accidentally locked beneath our childhood home. As I hit the main road, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. I almost didn't answer, but the fear of missing a vital piece of information, or maybe just the last chance to hear his voice, made me swipe the screen. "Leo, you won't believe it. Meridian just signed off early. They love the equity on the old place. I'm already driving out to the house to start clearing things out before the official handover tomorrow morning. I told you I'd pull this off. I told you I didn't need your dusty little workshop share. I just bought myself a decade of success." Mark's voice crackled with manic triumph, utterly unaware of the doom he was embracing. "Mark, pull over right now. Do not go near the house," I yelled, but the line abruptly went dead, replaced by a single cryptic text message from an unknown number, sent milliseconds after Mark hung up. "The seal is already broken. Check the cellar." The cryptic text hit my screen like a physical jolt. "The seal is already broken. Check the cellar." It hadn't been sent by Mark. His triumph was too loud, too self-absorbed to be interrupted by calculated warnings. It came from an unknown sender, yet it confirmed my deepest fear. The 72-hour countdown hadn't started. It had already begun. I slammed the brakes on my truck just shy of the Meridian Trust building downtown. Fighting Mark in a boardroom was pointless now. The papers were signed, the title was transferred. The only place that mattered was the house, the Nexus. "Mr. Davies, forget Meridian," I barked into the phone, pulling a hard U-turn. "The seal is broken. What did Dad do to stabilize the energy? What were the countermeasures?" Davies' voice crackled with static and panic. "Leo, I don't know the specifics. He always kept the countermeasures documented separately from the archival materials, hidden deep within the structure itself. He said they were physical anchors, specific materials interwoven into the foundation stonework during the original 1920s build. If they are disturbed, the flow becomes erratic." "Disturbed by what?" I demanded, speeding toward the familiar suburban streets that now felt dangerously foreign. "By physical interference, Leo, or perhaps by the presence of the wrong kind of energy signature." I sped down Elm Street, the tires squealing slightly as I rounded the corner onto our old lane. The house sat there, imposing and familiar under the dull autumn sky. But something was wrong. Even from 200 yards away, the light looked wrong. It wasn't the soft, predictable afternoon glow. The air around the roofline seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day, except it was cold outside. I saw Mark's pristine black SUV parked haphazardly in the driveway. He had arrived early. I pulled up behind the SUV, scrambling out of my truck before it was fully stopped. The front door was wide open, a gaping maw. "Mark!" I shouted, running up the porch steps. The house felt electrically charged. The hairs on my arms stood up straight. I burst through the entryway, expecting to find him celebrating in the living room, perhaps already on the phone with his creditors. But the living room was empty. The furniture was still draped in dust sheets, exactly as we'd left it after the funeral. "Mark, this isn't a joke!" No answer, just the faint, strange hum emanating from deeper within the structure. I headed toward the kitchen, where the door to the cellar was located, a solid wooden hatch set into the floorboards, secured by a simple, heavy iron bolt Dad had installed years ago. That bolt, I now realized, must have been the final physical lock on the containment layer, not just the storage space. The cellar door was ajar. The iron bolt was lying bent and discarded on the floor beside it, twisted into a grotesque shape that looked exactly like the skeleton key Mr. Davies had been holding. Mark hadn't just accessed the basement, he had forcefully broken the final physical barrier Dad had put in place. "Mark!" I yelled, throwing the hatch open and peering down into the black maw of the stairs. The humming intensified, vibrating up through the treads of the wooden steps. I pulled out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and started descending into the cellar. The familiar stone walls of the foundation were slick with condensation, but that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the light emanating from the far corner of the cellar, a section that had always been blocked by stacks of old paint cans and broken furniture. Mark had clearly spent the time between signing the papers and now clearing out that entire corner. The debris was piled haphazardly against the far wall, and in the newly exposed area, the stone foundation was visibly different. It wasn't the rough-hewn granite of the rest of the cellar. This section was lined with precisely cut slate tiles, fitted together with unnerving accuracy. And in the center of the slate tiling, Mark stood. He wasn't moving. He was staring down at something on the ground, illuminated by a faint, pulsing blue light that seemed to seep directly from the stone beneath his feet. "Mark, get away from there, now!" I shouted, scrambling down the last few steps. He didn't flinch. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He was completely transfixed by the light. I reached him, placing a hand on his shoulder, ready to physically drag him away. That's when I saw what was illuminating the slate. It wasn't just a glow from the stone. It was reflecting off something metallic in the center of the slate mosaic. It looked like an old bronze astrolabe, intricately designed but embedded flush into the stone floor, clearly part of Dad's stabilizing mechanism, and Mark's foot was resting directly on top of the astrolabe, crushing a section of its delicate interlocking rings. As my hand touched his shoulder, Mark finally moved, but not toward me. He let out a slow, ragged exhale that sounded less like a breath and more like the sucking vacuum of a drain. "Leo," he whispered. His eyes glazed over, fixed on the swirling blue light beneath his foot. "It's not debt. It's not money. Dad wasn't hiding assets. He was hiding power." As he spoke, the blue light intensified violently, spitting tiny, brilliant sparks against the damp stone walls. The humming ceased, replaced by a sound like tearing silk, and the entire cellar floor vibrated so hard I stumbled back against the stairs. Mark's focus snapped away from the floor, and he looked directly at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying, unnatural clarity that I had never seen before, not even in his most ambitious moments. "And now," he hissed, a genuinely terrifying smile spreading across his face, a smile that didn't look like his own. "It's mine." At that exact moment, the slate tiles around the crushed astrolabe began to lift, not shattering, but smoothly retracting into the stone foundation like segments of a giant ancient clockwork mechanism being set in motion, revealing a cavity beneath, far deeper than the cellar floor, from which a sudden, impossibly cold wind gusted upwards, smelling sharply of ozone and something anciently foul. The cold wind that erupted from the newly exposed cavity was agonizing. It didn't just lower the temperature, it sucked the heat directly from my lungs, making me gasp and stumble backward up the cellar steps. Mark, however, remained standing in the epicenter of the disturbance, bathed in the sickeningly bright blue light that now pulsed in rhythm with the deep, subsonic tremor shaking the foundation. "Mark, get out of there!" I screamed, scrambling higher up the stairs, instinctively trying to put distance between myself and whatever monstrous mechanism Dad had labored to keep dormant. Mark didn't seem to hear me. He was rigid, his body vibrating subtly with the energy now pouring from the abyss beneath his feet. The smile remained fixed, but his eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the stone walls of the cellar. "He tried to contain it," Mark murmured, his voice echoing strangely, layered with another deeper resonance that was definitely not his own. He thought accounting could balance the books of the universe. Foolish. This was it. Dad's secret wasn't a confession of fraud. It was a confession of responsibility. He hadn't just been protecting Mark from jail. He'd been using our family home as a lid on something far more dangerous than a business failure. And Mark, in his avarice, had just lifted that lid. I looked back down. The gaping hole beneath the astrolabe was now clearly visible, a smooth vertical shaft descending into absolute blackness. The blue light was flickering, trying to gain dominance over the surrounding darkness. I realized I didn't have time to get Mr. Davies or call the authorities. Mark was gone, possessed by whatever cosmic current Dad had tried to ground. If I left, the energy would stabilize under Mark's control, or it would erupt, taking the neighborhood with it. I had to break the connection. Ignoring the painful cold, I lunged back down the stairs. As I approached the edge of the exposed shaft, I saw my only chance, the crushed astrolabe beneath Mark's foot. It was Dad's countermeasure, broken by Mark's weight. "Mark, you need to move." I grabbed his arm, pulling hard. He finally reacted, but not by freeing himself. He turned his head slowly, his eyes now glowing with the same faint blue as the light emanating from the hole. The look in those eyes was ancient, cold, and utterly devoid of any recognition of me as his brother. "You," the layered voice hissed through Mark's lips, "the other anchor. You interfere with the process." He threw me off with impossible strength. I hit the stone wall hard, the breath knocked out of me. I saw him raise his foot from the astrolabe, intending, I thought, to smash the device entirely. But instead of crushing it further, he simply moved his foot to the side, gently stepping away from the mechanism as if afraid of damaging a valuable piece of equipment. The moment his weight lifted from the astrolabe, the blue light surged one last time, then snapped back, replaced by a dull, greenish-yellow glow emanating from the shaft. The unnatural wind stopped. The shaking subsided. The deep, resonant humming returned, but this time it sounded calmer, regulated. Mark stood there, blinking rapidly, his face suddenly wet with sweat, the blue glow receding from his eyes, leaving them red-rimmed and exhausted. He swayed, clutching his head. "Leo? What happened? Where are we? Did I pass out?" he mumbled, his voice strained and completely, recognizably his again, confused, desperate, but undeniably Mark. I slowly pushed myself up from the wall, favoring my bruised ribs. I looked at the open shaft, now radiating the steady, subdued yellow light. "You stood on the stabilizer, Mark," I managed, testing the air. It was just damp, musty cellar air again. "You broke the lock and then you accidentally stepped off the pressure point." Mark looked down at the exposed mechanism, then back at the strange, smooth cavity in the floor. He didn't seem to remember the words he'd spoken moments ago, the terrifying clarity of possession. He just looked horrified by the destruction he'd wrought. "The house. What have I done to the house?" he stammered, finally noticing the destruction of the cellar floor. "You haven't destroyed it yet," I said, walking cautiously toward the shaft. "Dad contained it, Mark. He didn't destroy it. He managed the flow." I looked down into the yellow-lit depth. It was an impossibly deep, perfectly smooth-sided tunnel, leading down further than my phone light could penetrate. I understood then. Dad hadn't been protecting us from the energy. He'd been protecting the energy from the world, using our inheritance structure as a fail-safe. If the house ownership shifted to the wrong person, the exploiter, the containment broke, and the energy source would be exposed. The 72-hour demolition order was to prevent that energy from leaking out into the town once the anchor point was shifted. "We have to fix this, Mark," I said, pulling out the crumpled paper where I'd scribbled the terms of our separation. I ripped it into confetti and let the pieces fall into the shaft. Mark stared at me, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension as he looked from the hole to me, then back to the hole. The fight was gone, replaced by a shared monumental terror. "Leo, I remember, I felt something pulling me. It wanted to use me to get out, and you stepped in the way." "I stepped in the way because you were about to become the conduit," I corrected him, my voice low. "We are both in this now, Mark. You don't get the cash buyout. You don't get the house. We are co-owners of a very large, very unstable containment field, and Mr. Davies is going to need a lot more information about the archive." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, preparing to call the solicitor, knowing this inheritance nightmare had just transmuted into a lifelong, terrifying partnership. I glanced at Mark, who was now peering into the abyss with a mixture of fear and the familiar, dangerous spark of curiosity. Just as I raised the phone to call Davies, a low, rhythmic scraping sound echoed up from the very bottom of the shaft, impossibly far below. It wasn't a hum or a tremor or the sound of wind. It was the sound of something vast, heavy, and very patient, beginning to slowly, deliberately climb.